Welcome to XTraw AI, and this is your host, Raghu Banda, where we extract the raw conversation shaping AI in the real world. Today's episode tackles a hard truth. If AI isn't designed for scale, it turns into rework and debt later. Our guest, Noureddine Oirkha, is an enterprise service management strategist who helps governments and large organizations operationalize AI safely and at scale. With deep experience across ERP transformations, post M&A integrations, governance, and decision log frameworks, he focuses on building AI systems that don't break under real world change. In this conversation, we discuss why pilots fail to scale, how reference architectures and versioning prevent brittle automation, the role of governance and decision logs in avoiding rebuilds. Let's dive in. All right, welcome back. So today on our podcast, I think we are going to talk about some other interesting topic. And with me, I have Mr. Noureddine Oirkha, and we are going to talk about the topic about building AI governance. So we go into how do we design for scale kind of options. Welcome on board, Noureddine.
Yeah, thank you, Raghu, for having me. Generally excited to be here.
All right, so let's get into the before we kick off the things, Noureddine. I start our conversation generally with a couple of teaser questions. I know you have spent a lot of time helping governments and global enterprises scale safety. Maybe like starting with ERP projects to post merger and acquisition, stabilization, and AI governance. So, what was that thing that initially pulled you into this world of these huge transformations and structured decision making projects? Or so, what made you get into this? What's your background or what's your backstory?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and that gets me back in the time. So when I tried my career, I was interested with a large ERP multi-country implementation, and that taught me to find opportunity in chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And very early, you understand into these projects that technology part of it, it's only part of the story. The magic happens when you start capturing decisions, bringing cultures together, and kind of implementing the trust across borders and cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And so fascinated allows you to transform that fear and mistrust into confidence, which makes us like that makes me very much passionate about this type of work. And immediately fell in love with the idea of weaving together pieces and bringing the clarity of a vision, the human touch, and the impact of multicultural projects.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that enlightens something in me.
Great, great. I think amazing, awesome to know that. So before we dive deeper, I would is there one particular moment in your career where something like a missing decision or a versioning strategy or a governance check caused some real world chaos, and how that shaped your philosophy in scaling AI and automation today? Like any particular moment?
Yeah, I think again, back in the career life cycle, you fall into large scale transformation, and most of the time, especially in the context of M&A post integration, things
Hmm.
have to move fast. Implementations have to go quickly. So
Hmm.
sometimes the teams who are implementing projects are reporting to, let's say, functional executives. which means that they are under pressure to
Hmm.
deliver results. And that brings the teams to, let's say, overlook some security and governance and structural um, things that they have to put in place for their project. And that always leads to chaos. Not a very specific project, but most of the time when I see this happening, I always see that the teams know that they are making a mistake, but under the pressure, we overlook it and we do it for the sake of speed. And that always leads to chaos, leads to rework, and the firm ends up paying for it later.
Okay. All right. So let's dive into the topic, today's topic. I would want to start with the theme why design for scale matters before even the first model is deployed. I think in this context, I want to see maybe what are those top uh, 2 to 3 early design mistakes you see many enterprises make when implementing these AI pilots, right? I think because it's easier to create an AI pilot than the actual. Of course, that is where you get an idea like where we are getting in. But there are some top 2 to 3 design mistakes that you might end up making when we are talking about these AI pilots.
Yeah, and great question, and thank you for the question. I think it can be true to every transformation project, but even more true for AI transformation because this transformation can be very impactful
Mhm.
and very quickly. So the first one might seem very straightforward, and which is problem statement.
Mhm.
So too often you see teams leaping into code before even agreeing or knowing what is the problem that we're solving and what is the business outcome that we want to realize. So this is a design misalignment that ends up cascading into every single piece of the project and end up getting the firms into endless cycles of rework and frustration. And just to explain this, the latest research have been looking at what are the most important part of a project
Mhm.
that uh, people should consider and that impact the success or the failure of a project. And defining or clarifying that barrier to be removed at the very beginning, each time came back as much more important than designing or defining the technology itself. So it's
Okay.
really important to frame the problem statement
Mhm.
and know what we're solving for, and then relate it or tie it directly to the business outcome. It should never be a standalone project. Another point, which is conceptual blind spots, and that relates to the first one. So most of the time, I see people building projects in or inside business units. So it's in a siloed manner.
Mhm.
They're using their own data, their own priorities, and they create what we would call local optimum.
Mhm.
Now, this always ends up creating side projects that sits on the periphery of business. So when the business wants to take them, scale or reuse, it end up in a closed loop because it never scales and it never ends in a successful implementation. And this is where chaos starts to be created because we're duplicating data. The same data business is used in different ways, and we don't know which one is most efficient. The last one, and again, it gets us to the data point. Data quality is key. So
Mhm.
before even thinking of an AI transformation project, it is really important to take care of the data. It's so easy to create a proof of concept. You create a CSV dump and then you hack a model, and here you are. But if your data are outdated, biased, and incomplete,
Mhm.
these flows goes throughout your model, and it just goes in every decision you make throughout. your project implementation. And when you build on outdated data, you build on a kind of it's a really weak foundation that you are putting for your project, and the cost of that, or the cost of remediation, becomes very high, because most of the time firms end up rebuilding systems entirely just because they want to solve for a fundamental data issue.
Okay. Beautiful. I think I like the way you put these 3 points, right? I think starting with the problem statement and then the local optimum, which I really liked the most because it is very important when you're trying to scale, and then obviously the data aspect. So here, if I hear it correctly, I think the reference architectures or versioning strategies or structured change controls can help. But how do they help? Can you highlight a bit to for the audience to understand how these can help as shock observers so that these AI programs or these AI projects can scale, because scaling is what it matters, right? I think we talk a lot about technology, we keep getting a lot of new things coming up, but unless until you scale, these business transformations cannot happen.
Well, spot on, Rago. I think you talked about the most important thing in those projects, which is scaling. So if we can scale, there's no need to start those
Right.
initiatives, because
Right.
it doesn't serve the end goal of the business. And when I talk about reference architecture, I always talk about discipline and freedom at the same time, and
Mm.
creating that balance. Because think of it like you're building a house or a car. Like, you don't just start by building the floors; you build the foundation, and those foundation is what allows you to think of the non-negotiable safety layers and what are the main components of this. Once this put in place, you can swap engines or components or whatever, or change everything that you need without re-engineering the whole concept. So
Mm.
your concept is built on a solid base. And this is what reference architecture is. When it comes to change, uh, this is what enables you to navigate and track how a system evolves,
Mhm.
and also roll back safely whenever it's needed.
Right.
So when you combine those two, how this work, or what is the engine that makes this work, you need to take them into a living decision log.
Mhm.
Why? Because again, we talk about scale, and scale happens over time. So in order for those two to serve you, you need to have a living decision log that tracks every decision, how we did things, why we did them, because downstream there are trade-offs that we make for the business, for
Right.
compliance, for rules, for whatever reason. And when teams will come in 1 year, 2 year, whatever, because it's a long transformation journey we're talking about, and it's a business transformation, people need to understand from where come those trade-offs and why those decisions have been taken, in order to avoid redoing the work or breaking things that have been done for a very legitimate reason, and end up costing a lot for the business.
Beautiful. So I get the point, like how this is very important. Now, we talked about these enterprises, the enterprise transformations at a high level. I know that you also have this experience working on government projects. And this is where I think things get a bit more challenging or a bit
Yeah.
more complicated, right? I think from your experience, how does, when you deal with governments, how does this AI governance itself differ when you are working on these public sector environments, right? I think there is um, these aspects of accountability, or when we talk about transparency, or when we talk about trust or audit trails. I like the aspect that you talked about, that living log, living revision log, right? I think which is very important. But when we talk about these public sector environments, mm, everything is non-negotiable. What is your experience in dealing with this?
So I think you have touched the most important thing when it comes to government sector
Mm-hmm.
versus private sector. So governments are there to serve citizens,
Right,
and hence the stakes are high.
right.
Always transparency and trust is at play in every single decision.
Mm-hmm.
So it's public money that is spent to generate a certain benefit. And let's say that a government, for example, wants to deploy an AI model,
Mm-hmm.
it might affect how social benefits are distributed or people that are tagged for law enforcement, or how resources are distributed over society. And if the model ends up being biased, that creates a whole political and democratic
True.
issue within the society. And this is why governments do not have the luxury to create kind of balance or um, trade offs. They have to abide with the risk regulations and have continuous oversight over every single decision they take. Whenever a model AI is trained, it has to go through the same rigorous audit and transparency process as in the very beginning of the project. And when you think about how much of data government institutions absorb, you now realize the effort that these agencies have to make in order to be compliant. As opposite to private sector,
Mm-hmm.
companies report more to consumers and shareholders.
Mm-hmm.
So AI is built for efficiency and competitiveness. So driving benefit is the priority. They can be more risk um, kind of adverse and they can accept a lower risk threshold. However, in governments, like there's no discussion around that. Like risk, governance, oversight, and decision making is really important in that process. And in every step of the way, it makes, for example, the procurement vehicle very slow. It has to go through different layers of stakeholders in order to approve the decision and different versions of trials. Added to that, all the privacy and sensitive data that you have to maintain, which add another layer of security that comes on top of the AI model. And when you know and see how AI work, you become very aware of the risk
Mm-hmm.
that the model be intruded or there is a data bias or data injection that makes the AI take decisions on some public services
Mm-hmm.
and turns it into a real, let's say, social or government problem.
Beautiful. So this is where I think you're talking more about how do we bring stability to complexity, because this is where uh, while much of the private sector projects are complex, when we talk about the public sector, they are not only complex but also they are more have to be adhering to this process, which is where there is a lot more transparency and a lot more trust is needed. So this is where there are a lot of things have to be taken care. So I have a general question now, getting into whether it is the public sector organizations, public sector companies, or the private sector. There is always this struggle to move from a prototyping or a proof of concept uh, to the actual production without creating a lot of technical or operational depth, right? I think why do you think, or what is the root cause? that these things happen, and how do you think that this can be addressed?
Yeah, so two main points here at different levels. So,
Mhm.
for example, and where or the first point brings me to, is it AI working for the business or the business working for the AI?
Mhm.
And what does that mean? Businesses, when dealing with AI and with the hype, they jump into the technology. They don't know why they're doing it or
Mhm.
what technology serves to their business. Depending on the identity of your business and what it's doing, you need a different AI model. Whether is it analytical? So if you're a financial institution, you need analytical AI. If you are more a government institution or a legal institution, you need more generative to generate your contracts and so and so on. And these are different models and structurally need different processes and ways of building. So it is really important to bring back the AI model to the identity of the enterprise and then building on it a safe environment
Mhm.
for the teams in order to iterate, fail, and learn. Amongst that, you add a layer of governance and controls in order to make sure that while your teams are moving faster and
Mhm.
allowing themselves to make mistakes and so on, you have the necessary controls in order not to break your compliance and make sure that you have a scalable model that goes throughout your business, let's say 360 view and not just focused on one side. So that's the first point of it. The second one is directly related to the governance, but it talks to the organizational layer.
Mhm.
So when you talk about AI, it's not just like another technology. It's a real transformation of how the business is done, and it can implicate also deep transformation of the role of people and their jobs.
Mhm.
So it's really important to position AI high enough in your organization in
Mhm.
order to give it that strategic level. So I'll just segue into a quick story. And I've been speaking with someone who has been talking to me as a CTO friend, and this board sitting there with consultants, etc., and they have been running a pilot of AI,
Mhm.
talking about the experience and so on. So the executive start looking the results, and all of a sudden one of them said, well, it doesn't make sense. All right, okay. So the team asked the person why it doesn't make sense, and it's just because it's against intuition.
Mhm.
This is how you show misalignment and you break the whole model, because all of a sudden you teach your teams that they should not rely on data,
Mhm.
they should not rely on the model, but you should rely on people's intuition. And this is how we build biased models that are, by the end of the day, unable to scale. You can never build a model if you don't entrust your teams and give them the necessary power to take decision and to adopt the right models without the fear or pressure from a higher level executive that comes in, and because they don't like the decisions, then they end up lowering the threshold. And by the end of the day, you find teams saying, yeah, it didn't work for us. Well, yeah, what didn't work? Is it the model, the governance, or your organizational structure that didn't allow the model to scale and become the business value that you want to generate?
Right. I think you made some very beautiful points. I think starting with the technology aspect about why we build technology depth, because you need to use the right models at the right time, and also use the models or the technology itself for doing the right transformation. In that way, you can scale as needed. I believe the example that you provided is also amazing, that you do not go by intuition, but you have to go with the data and with the model and with the story and the context. So I know you've worked with some major ERP rollouts and major implementations across the globe. So, and of course, what are some of the patterns that you see that are being repeated across, uh, in these transformations, uh, that also show up in these AI programs? What are some of those things that you uh, repeat across this, or you notice?
Yeah. Some of the most important ones, and I would draw them into, let's say, three patterns: framing, structuring, and evaluating.
Mhm.
So when you frame your vision for transformation, again, you talk about the purpose of the business. And most of the time, executives or leadership must win hearts because it's the people who drive the change.
Right, right.
So you need to align people's purpose and make sure that people do not see this transformation as a threat in order for them to adopt it and empower it. Otherwise, they will create resistance, and then you will be impacted. You won't move with the same path pace you want, or you won't reach the objective that you want. So it's really important to create that alignment with people.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is structuring. And again, I come back to, I can't repeat enough the organizational layer. If you need, and especially in AI transformation, your data science team
Mm-hmm.
must no more sit under your functional team or under as a technical execution. It should have a seat at the board. The organization should send a strong message, which is now data is a strategic asset for us.
Right.
And decision is made at the highest level of the company and then cascades down.
Mm-hmm.
The third point, which is evaluating. So now we have framed our message and our vision and aligned our people. We have set the right organization.
Mm-hmm.
How do we bring this to life and how do we make this sustainable?
Mm-hmm.
We need to establish a clear evaluation and clearly define how do we measure success. KPIs are really important in here, establishing that continuous feedback loop and adoption and not just rely on short-term objectives. However, putting in place, and those KPIs should evolve, by the way. We
Right.
talk about scaling the model, but we never talk about how often we should change our KPIs. And I do think that regularly it should go hand in hand. And each time we want to change or evolve the model, our KPIs should change at the same
Change. Mm-hmm. Beautiful. I think I like these three aspects of framing, structuring, and evaluating. Basically, what you're saying is that you need to have an overall strategy about how do we define this and how do we drive this before even getting into the process. And then, of course, that will eventually evolve as we speak, which means that we get into this kind of the data economics, right? I think.
time.
Uh, could you explain how this data economics leads to these kind of whether it is good automation or weaker automation? If it is a weak data economics, it might lead to brittle automations or inconsistencies and expensive rebuilds, right? I think uh, so. The reason why I'm talking about data economics is that you speak frequently about in that kind of terminology, right? I think what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So there are again two layers to see things. And the first one, what is data economics? So when I say data economics, we're talking in the digital world, and we should consider in the age or the era of AI, data as a digital asset,
Mm-hmm.
but it is a business asset, not an IT asset. It's no more an IT asset,
Mm-hmm.
which means that the data has its supply and demand, and it has its incentives and cost of ownership.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever we handle the data, we talk about who will consume the data, how much it costs us, what value it drives. Without this information, we end up consuming data for the sake of consuming data. We come back to why we're doing AI models.
Right.
And we need to tie this to what value it generates to the business. So when we look at this, we will find ourselves very much more selective in the type of data that we are using than if we're talking just about general business data and trying to generate everything. So, do we want to generate internal efficiency? And then these are all the knowledge management, internal processes, SOPs, whatever we need in order to make people win time and concentrate on production. If we want to drive business value, then we are in a very different set of data. And each of those has a different cost, has a different ownership, and
Mm-hmm.
has a different supply and demand process. So that's the first thing that we need to look at when we talk about building automation, etc. And why I'm saying this, because once we have defined the type of data, its cost, and who owns it, now when we want to go into automation, the first thing that we will ask is where this data will be sitting.
Mm-hmm.
And based on those identifiers, let's say, we would define maybe we would need an open technology because we want to reduce dependencies on vendors, and it's a long-term value driven data that we want to maintain sustainably, and the cost is already high, so we don't want to drive it higher. If the data is sensitive enough, maybe it would impose on us to go into a more closer technology. Now this is the technology layer. The next one is when we build in governance in our automation, we have to build the kind of verifications and triggers of compliance checks within the automation itself, within the process itself. So the business process should hold into it triggers to bring alerts and safety and risk to feed the governance committee whenever they are checking or oversighting the performance of the AI model. And once we combine that economic view of data,
Mm-hmm.
the governance, then we can build a data model that is sustainable and that doesn't end up bleeding the business instead of bringing value. Because most of the misconceptions that people have when we talk to them, it's you talk about AI and they think it's free.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
every AI generation has a token, the
Yeah.
least one.
Yeah.
All right. And this token is using a set of data. How
Mm-hmm.
do we generate this data? Is it a consumer data? Then, okay, you paid money to get this data. How
Mm-hmm.
much you paid for that data? All of this constitute a cost of ownership that will validate or not your business case to build an AI model upon this data based on how much it will get back to the business as well.
Beautiful. I think you laid it out very well. I think explaining the data economics and how uh, things can get better or worse, and how the value will be perceived. And now, when I talk, and while this is all looks, I shouldn't say easy, but at least a process oriented aspect when we talk about private organizations. But when you get into the government organizations or the public sector, things um, change. I think things might evolve in a little different way, right? I think for government or the regulated industries, what are those unique blockers that you have uh, in this aspects? Any thoughts that you could bring up here?
Yeah, I mean, we go back to the level of risk that is identified in government institutions. We talked about the long procurement cycles because of the decision making and
Mm,
transparency. It also, unlike private institutions, in a private organization, you would find multi departments. And most of the time, the data would flow through those departments. When you take a government institution, each department is a standalone.
mm,
So, health carries a very different set of data than public services and then municipalities. So, the level of privacy is not the same. And the cost of ownership again and the risk related to this data is very different. So that's the first one where you cannot build an overall AI model. You need to build even within municipalities. You have public projects, you have uh, citizen services, and you have also political programs. So you cannot hold those three in the same AI model. So that means that is it that you need to create three different AI models?
mm,
And in order to match compliance with all of those three, it means that you have to create three governance structures
mm,
and different budgets when we know that government institutions don't have that lever of budget that allows them to do so. So it's
mm,
always a trade off. Which is most important? Where do you want to place the investment? So this is what the first step that would take a lot of time.
mm,
Now, when we have that decision taken, it comes to bringing this to life. So let's, for example, just take an FOI, Freedom of Information project that goes to government institution. Depending on the province, the city, or the country, there are different regulations. So
mhm,
again, it has to be adapted. The level of privacy, the anonymization that needs to be there, who asked for the information, and for how much time we hold the data for people and make it available. That brings another level of complexity that private sector is not faced with. And all of these needs a lot of, let's say, design time and decision time. So the lead time to market is very often much more longer than the private sector. It's not because they are slow, it's because they are slowed by design
okay,
due to the regulations and due to the risks and implications that are towards what they are managing as data.
beautiful. So I think now, if I look back and see uh, where do organizations underestimate the risks the most? Do you think it is more on the architecture layer, or the policy, or the processes, or people readiness, or data collection, data anonym, or the tasks around data? So where do you think generally these most organizations underestimate the risk the most?
So the most of the time, I think the three are important, are very important, but the number one would be people.
People.
Most of the time, the hype around technology transformation hides people concern and
Hmm.
hides this vision from a decision maker. So people prepare and there are communications, like organizations do not miss that completely, but it's how much effort should I put in it, which is most of the time underestimated. Because whenever, and I see this continuously, whenever you go into an organization, private it is or government, and you talk about a new technology, there's always that hype and people are excited, etc. But behind that, there are a lot of questioning happening that
Mm.
is not answered and you don't see very often at that level of the project. It comes down the road because when you're building a technology, you need people in
Mhm.
order to design the processes, design the architecture, and tell you how they do their work.
Right.
And down the road, they come to the realization that maybe my job is being replaced. And
Mm.
this is where we come across bottlenecks
Okay.
because we didn't prepare people enough in order to see this technology as an augmentation and not as a threat. So that's the first point that I would really underline. I think readiness comes goes to people. That's the first point.
Mm.
Then putting in place the policies and
Okay.
processes. So without those policies and processes, again, we cannot stream enough the information that flows in the project, including those risks, people risk, resistance,
Mhm.
issues, whatever. So when we don't have those strong policies, we cannot establish the right governance and decision making stream that remediates to those ones before they become a blocking issue.
Mm.
And that's the second in importance for me. Then comes architecture. So we
Okay.
always blame architecture, but most of the time I would say that it's not architecture. Like technical team, most of the time are passionate about what they're doing and they would
Mm.
choose for you the best technology, the best design, unless they have pressure, whatever, they would do the work. But if the functional process does not enforce this, and hence it brings us to the policies and people, that architecture will never succeed because it doesn't include the heart of the business that we want to translate. So it's all of them are three layers, but I would bring people at first, policies and processes, and then a good reference architecture and decision log. Again, is really important so that we can build strong projects tied to the business,
Mhm.
empowering people, and sustainably maintained.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I think, like always, I think it is not that the technology or the reference architectures, which generally we try to point when we run into some issues, but it's always drives from the people and then the policies and processes. So before I go into the interesting question that I talk about, again, I want to kind of pivot towards the public sector companies, public sector or the governments. You help governments adopt AI responsibly, not just rapidly, right? I think so. I know you talked about this a bit, but could you reiterate what does a responsible by design AI architecture look like in a practice? I want to kind of because when we deal with governments or public sector companies, I think this becomes even more important.
Again, I think it relates to why the AI is set at the first time.
Mm-hmm.
So what does it serve?
Mm-hmm.
And I think governments excel in not just jumping into the technology, but really assessing the the why. I would even go into assessing too much the why. Sometimes we need to go into a pilot, of course, creating a scalable pilot, but we need to create a proof of concept and see whether it works. So building responsible AI for governments comes to, is it at the service of the people we serve, which are the citizens,
Mhm.
and how this makes their lives easier and the access to services faster and continuous as opposite to today. So when we're it's and if I want to summarize this, it would bring me to the point of what is the core mission of the business or the institution, if it is government, and then if AI serves that core mission. And a responsible implementation would be very selective in serving the main core missions that this institution serves. Let's take, for example, a municipality. Citizen services has become very important and cities grow continuously. So how do I go from people waiting for answers and
Mhm.
information for 1 day or 2 days or 3 days to instant quick answer that is valuable to the citizen again? We don't want to go into the chatbots that just ask you 10 questions and then redirect you towards an agent, which is
Mhm.
useless. We're spending money for nothing.
Right.
That's not responsible because we're not serving the end mission. Now, if we make the AI learn the processes and go through decision trees, and the AI is able to bring at least the first or second level of answer, at least
Mhm.
bring into the citizen, for example, the type of paperwork that he has to prepare or she has to prepare before you come to ask for a service, that's a win of time.
Right.
That's creating value for people. We go to permitting, for example. Permitting today is digitized. You go to a site and you pay, etc. However, what we see in this exact model is that it's a repeated action. Like
Okay.
there's no arbitrary decisions made. There are regulations,
Okay.
there are pieces of lands,
Mhm.
and there are decision tree. Whether this piece of land is allowed to build, for example, one floor, two floor, is it allowed to add extensions, etc. All of these are set of data that we can already automate,
Mhm.
feed into the AI. So now all of a sudden we have the permitting resolved in 5 minutes instead of waiting for an agent to come and process the payment and take the same decision because it's all based on rules and regulations. There's no arbitration.
Right.
So this is where we can scale the AI model,
Awesome.
for example, to
Mhm.
governance while building responsible models and services that serve the citizen.
Right. Right. Beautiful. I think I like the example that you have provided, taking the example of permits and how you can bring in, take a lot of questions, but again, converting these questions and bringing it into the system and then providing the solution at a faster pace so that it's really helping the citizen services uh, at a faster pace and also attending the need rather than repeating or doing more arbitration. So, with this, I would like to now go to the interesting question. I term this as the extra AI question, the million dollar, billion dollar question. I keep saying, if you had to give enterprises one non negotiable practice for scaling without rebuilds, rebuilds is the key word, right? What would it be?
Um, one advice.
One
I
advice.
think
One,
it's
yeah,
it's
one advice, one phrase, or whatever. Huh.
it's a set of things, but it goes through governance.
Yeah.
And what do I governance for me must be at the heart of every AI. It's important to all transformation projects, but then we're talking about data manipulation. It
Mm.
has to be to be a continuous strong. It's not just a project life cycle. Why is that? It's because we talked about decision logs. And for me, that's the first thing that should be taken when we talk about governance. If we want to avoid rebuild, we want to understand why we built something and why we took a decision at a certain moment of the project or for the business life cycle or the institution life cycle. That is the most precious piece
Hmm.
of information that an institution should hold throughout the life cycle of the product, because the project becomes a product and that product has a life cycle, and that life cycle goes through its decision logs. And people can change position, teams can go and come, but that piece of information should be a living document that feeds every person who's sitting at the decision seat at a certain moment of that life cycle.
Beautiful.
That would be the most important thing for me.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I think that's amazing. I think thanks for joining the podcast. But one last question before I let you go. I think it's a great conversation. Uh,
Thank you.
what does the future of AI governance could look like when every enterprise becomes AI native? I know this is a very futuristic thought, but I know you've been in this space for some time, and governance is a key factor.
I think it's related to AI is changing fundamentally
Hmm.
how people are doing their jobs,
Right,
but it's not replacing it.
right.
And I am convinced of that. So I do believe, and I'm one of those who do believe that AI creates more job opportunities
Hmm.
than before AI. But in order to integrate it in a very effective way in the business, and this is where the story evolves, is because how do we integrate it in an effective way in business and not just make it another research tool or an acceleration tool? Like, we have ready processes. If you generate them through AI, that's not business value. But if you do replace redundant, repeatable tasks while you um, make people concentrate on value driven actions, that's where you create value. And the most important value driven that we have missed on the late years is client and human relationship. So, from where I come, it's, if you see the ecosystem today, everyone wants to do business, but we have less and less time to
Mm,
build a relationship and create that human connection.
mm,
With AI, let's say, for example, a salesperson or an admin or a customer service, now you remove, in the future, I see that all of these tasks are fully automated while
mhm.
those people focus on the essential again, which is going back there to the client, listening to them, and solving their problems. So I do believe that the future of AI will create more human interaction than we do have today, as the opposite of what we think.
Beautiful. I think I like I like the way you have put. I think I like the way how you brought the human element into that, and it's amazing. Yeah, I love it. And thanks for your time.
Well,
Amazing.
thanks for you. Thanks for you, Rago. It was a pleasure being with you.
That was an insightful conversation and a strong reminder that when you design AI for scale, you design for durability, not rework. A huge thank you to Noureddine Oirkha, and thank you to our listeners for being part of the XTraw AI journey. We're heading into a big moment, the season 16 finale, the year-end wrap-up, and the season-end finale, all coming up soon, and we're not stopping there. Stay tuned for Season 17 with even more powerful conversations, our new thought leadership series featuring leading voices shaping AI deeper dialogues on enterprise, AI, governance, and real-world impact. Until then, happy predicting the future with AI technologies, and stay XTraw AI.